And now you may know, you have read it in the big journals, the chimpanzee and the human has 98% of the genetic code completely equal. What makes the human a human? The human has created the facility to speak. I like to go to southern India, to Mahabalipuram, to see the big rock where Hanuman and his fellow monkeys come down and come to be humans on this earth. Yeah? So the human can speak. That means he can encode his thoughts. And then the Indians were very strong. They invented a coding of the coding, being called modern mathematics. I roamed with Milind Kirtane to Jaipur, to the famous school of mathematicians down there, of this Maharaja. I admired it, and I show these pictures in my fine art lecture. So we have three approaches of the patient. The patient is, or towards the patient. The patient is coming and telling you, doctor, I'm suffering from vertigo. And then he tells you all his subjective story. Therefore, he needs to use words. And you need to listen and best to record it down. But then you are thinking that he is something like a house or like a car and so on, that there must be some broken pieces, and you think like an architect. You think like a mechanic. But then the patient may be dead, you've got a wonderful body, and something is not working within the body. And then comes a third dimension, that's function. And the function best can be displayed and shown by the mathematical function. And all of us had such an education that we learned geometrics, arithmetic, and when we well apply it and we can think in these spheres, we can create such a network that we can use all the drugs which Anirban Bishwash has so well explained to you. And this now is showing you a sketch about vertigo. So the patient is suffering from a sensation that he falls out of the world. The humans acquired the possibility to stand up from a tetrapedal walk, and that they took their head up, that they could see and listen what was happening in front of them, and that mentally they could make the decision what they would do, not try out whether they could eat the lion or the lion would eat them. Yeah. So they saw the lion approaching and they said, "Oh, this guy is a little bit bigger. Let me run away." Yeah. So this system is however, this system is based on a very complicated sense. It is a super sense, which in these days could have been invented either here in your city or in Bangalore with all the Indian programmers. So vertigo, as has been pointed out already by Anirban in his wonderful talk, is a sensation that the humans feel the world is dancing around them. So our spatial concept is no longer correct. Or that we are revolving within the world. Or that they feel dizzy, unstable, faint, black out, they are disoriented, they are mentally bewildered and confused. Now, we know since long that there is in the inner ear an organ for inertia measurement. You know, there was a famous philosopher, and at first he was a sweeper boy, a cleaner boy in Cambridge, and there was Isaac Newton. And there was a plague in Cambridge 400 years back. And he went home to his parents. They were little peasants in Cornwall, I think. And he was sleeping underneath of an apple tree, and the apple fell on his head. He said, "Damn, why did this apple fall on my head? It could fall in any other direction, but not on my head." And then he thought, thinking about it, and discovered inertia. Until then, nobody knew what it was. We took it for granted. So, and the receptors are sending information into the brain, to the various complexes, and finally we establish a concept of equilibrium. And the human for measuring, which came up in the 19th century through Professor Mach, you know, the accelerations of a car, Mach 1, Mach 2, or aircraft, sound wall which is broken and so on. And he was first a physiologist, physicist, and finally ended up on the chair of philosophy in Vienna. But that's another story I talk about on next Saturday in Millen's home. And they quickly came across that they could measure a beautiful signal, which is the nystagmus, the jerking movement of the eye, which is responding to the different types of equilibrium reactions. And before this, Professor Romberg already at 1848 had discovered that equilibrium has to do something with keeping up stance, and when it is disturbed, the fellow or the patient is falling. Now, the story in total tells us the human, when standing up from, already the monkey, when standing up from the tetrapodal walk, he comprises information already available from the sight, from the view, from the hearing. He hears at the dark a noise coming from the left, from the south, from the right, or from in front or back, from the kinesthetic sensors, proprioception, whether he bends his neck or whether he's inclined to the right or to the left, and then from the lateral organs, the canals, and the otolith. All this is brought together, and all this is made into what I call a spatial concept. A spatial concept is when you at night, for instance, take your car, it is raining, and you want to go from one little city to another. From time to time you see a tree on the right or on the left side, or maybe you see a marker in the center of the road. But as you have seen so many roads already, you know how a road functions, and you can precisely go on your left side and turn the bends and come home. And this is the cybernetically arranged equilibrium sense. Therefore it's so difficult to be understood. But this sense needs permanently to be trained. And it goes for the old proverb, a rolling stone doesn't catch moss. Yeah? So whenever you have a vertigo patient, keep him moved. Take him out of the bed. And you prescribe him all the wonderful pills Aniban has demonstrated to you. Just throw them into the room and say, okay, you go to the hall and pick yourself the pills. Plus, you have him dressing himself. You have to not making him a separatist in his social field. So he has then to go and contact his neighbors, to make his little shoppings, go walking down the marketplace, and so on, so that he is moved, as the interactions here must permanently be trained. And the old Greek had a saying. They said there was a Sphinx of Theban. Actually, it was Theban, was not Corinth, it was Theban. And whoever passed along, she was a mighty godlike being, and she said, who is it? In the morning, he walks on four legs. At noon, he walks on two. Oedipus knew it, and he said immediately, this is the human. When he's born, in the morning of his life, he crawls on the four legs. At the noon of his life, like where all of us are here, we stand on third leg, the stick. The cane is very, very important for treating vertigo. The heads from our head, and who broke the sticks and threw the sticks away. So use a hat when you're in the sun, sombrero like the Mexicans, and use a cane in your hand when you walk. When you grow older, all the young people here don't need it, you don't need it, but maybe you come into my age and beyond, then you need it. So, University of Würzburg, there you find, it's a computer shop, there you find a lot of electronics. and we attach the patient through cablings to the electronystagmography, through other cablings and electrodes to electrocardiography, or to here to the evoked potentials, visually evoked, acoustically evoked, or the audioacoustic emissions, and we position the patient right there. You see ENG electrode, ECG electrodes. There's a lot of monitoring going on, and all this is fed into machines where we can read it out. So we try to get an impression of this movement. And the doctor, only having French goggles, has a lot of problems to discriminate this. My dear friend, Professor Dr. Eiji Sakata, who had a chair for neurotology in Japan, one of the two chairs, and who is also the doctor to the Tenno, to the emperor. He made movies with at least 200 types of different nystagmus. So you need a lot of experience when you only glance at the eye and then at the other eye for knowing what that should be. Yeah? You're much easier off when you stick electrodes around the eyes like we do here. These are Z-like, Z-shaped little plates of silver which are clipped on, and then the whole thing runs into the polygraphs. So the eye is polarized that way. The cornea is positive, retina is negative, and then we are applying this scheme of electrodes, horizontal right eye, horizontal left eye, and both the eyes horizontal, and vertical right eye and vertical left eye. So if something is out of order in the recordings of the right and the left eye, that the eyes beat both towards the nose, or both beat temporarily, which we call ocular dissociation, then you see here that you get a zero line or much reduced thing or other things. Yeah. So we stick, it's a very simple procedure which I learned in Sweden with Dr. Henriksson as early as 67. So you just stick surface electrodes, nothing more. As you have a lot of fat on the skin, maybe you take a little grinder and grind the fat away, and then you drip a drip of electron glue on it. And so for the reducing the skin resistance. And then you insert a baby feeding tube into the external meatus, and you attach a plastic bag to the auricle. And then you say, okay, patient, I go to calorize you. Many of the patients then jump up and say, oh, doctor, please don't give me a brainwash. I said, well, brainwash. Now, the last doctor, he came with such a syringe, half a liter of water, and brought it in, and he blew me out my brain and so on. Or some magical patient come, sir, you diluted my brain. You injected me water into the brain. No, I say, look at the back, it came back. Or some other, you wash out my brain. So the patient are confronted with a funny situation to them, yeah? And they suffer from vertigo then, which builds up and goes down. So once you have prepared the patient that way, only take 20 milliliters of water. And the water for cold is 30 centigrade. Don't use this ice water, it's horrible for the patient, yeah? And you got a lot of vegetative reactions. And the hot is 44 centigrades. Don't boil him like an egg that you pour the 50 or 55 centigrades into this. Yeah. So, and then it comes that you find this electron nystagmogram with, in this case, left 30 degrees, right beating nystagmus. This is right eye, left eye, and that's the sum of the two. And here's the vertical. And you see there's much more vertical activity on the left eye. The calorization is the left. And there's more activity on the left eye horizontally. We call it the leading eye and the following eye. Beautifully to be seen. And then you measure the frequency. You know, all of you, a young fiancé or a young fellow who wants to become a fiancé is in love with a beautiful lady, and so he goes home seeing the mother-in-law for the first time, and his heart runs berserk. 195 pulse, yeah? Blood pressure shoots also up to 195 systolic. This man doesn't have any heart disease, yeah? We say it's your heart, but in reality, it's a dysfunction of the brainstem. The brainstem has a supervisory regulation. For instance, when I see, for expertises now, the patients after whiplash injury and so on, yeah, with much of vegetative dysfunction. Yeah, the dysfunction comes from the brainstem, and you can easily measure it. There we've got a fantastic tool for it. So as early as the whole story started with the butterfly in the summer of 1967, that I said, gee, what I do here is cybernetics, pure cybernetics. And as I always wanted to study cybernetics, so I was happy to find my beloved field. When you see this electromagnetic, which you saw just, you can identify beat after beat just by making a mark. Then you take any 5 or 10 second interval and you build up a histogram. That histogram has the disadvantage, it has first a positive inclination and then a negative inclination. So you integrate the whole thing, and then you get the central characteristic of this individual response. Now you take yourself 10,000, first 10 patients, then 100 patients, then 1,000 patients, then 10,000 patients, then 30,000 patients, as we did with our Databank Nordic, and you measure them, and then you come to normal ranges. Now, what do we do? During 30 seconds at the maximum, we count the beat rate. This is 30 millimeter for the 30 seconds. We go up here per beat 1 millimeter, make a cross mark, and you have the characteristic. Now you bring law and order into it. You say this is the right area, this is the left ear, this is the right beating nystagmus, that's the left beating nystagmus. So then right warm, right cold, and in opposite position, left warm, left cold. This is right ear, this is left ear, this is left beating nystagmus, right beating nystagmus. Okay, when you do so, now you've got a patient with a severe loss of the function of the right ear. You put the nystagmus curve, he only has left beating nystagmus. So he does not show any right beating nystagmus. And this curve is similar to that of the spontaneous nystagmus. He has tremendous spontaneous nystagmus. Then you take the right cold, nearly is the same like the spontaneous nystagmus. Right ear does not send an information. And then you take the left ear warm, much more than the spontaneous nystagmus, and the cold, of course, right beating. So you see, this is a typical peripheral vestibular functional loss in a 43 years female. No problem. That's a little tangential conflict. So then we learned when you have a peripheral lesion, they may occur with or without spontaneous nystagmus, whether the lesion is distal or proximal of the ganglion. Then you have an inhibition. This ear affected produces too little response. But on the healthy side, you find normal reaction, peripheral functional loss, and you can then decide. However, when we went into this business in '67 and we built up our first databank, we built 3 databanks. Nordic 1. You are here now in Calcutta in India, the center of the software of the world. And you must know, in those years, we only had very poor computers. The first computer of the modern computer of the world had been constructed by Dr. Konrad Zuse in Berlin as early as 1936. And by the end of the war, Germany had 4 generations, but Hitler didn't know what to do with it. So in those days, we had to punch all our data into punch cards. Then we 3,600 cases with 1,000 parameters. Then we started in 1970 around with Nordic 2, as we changed from punch cards into punch strips. And then by 73 we put in 6,500. And then we started by 74 something with Nordic 3. Then we used magnetic tapes. Nobody can read my tapes from this time anymore, yeah? Everybody said, you must trust our tapes. No, it was nothing, yeah? And so I was lucky that I mistrusted them and I got everything printed out on paper. Now we've got a cubic meter or 2 cubic meters of data. Yeah? So, and then started the time of the floppy. And then we built up. Nodec 3 was more than 10,000, Nodec 4 was more than 10,000, and then we had all the data available which we needed for normalize the whole thing. That lasted until 82. Now there is another situation that we have a lesion in the temporal lobe. That is a nystagmus preponderance, the overactive preponderance. And the nystagmus beating towards this temporal lobe, right cold, left warm. Now, vertigo we have to accept is something happening in the inner ear, or no, being triggered, happening in the brain. Being triggered from the ear, from the nerve, from the lower brainstem, from the upper brainstem, the mesencephalon, and even from the cortex. Vertigo must be found out where comes its irritation. So this organ of Corti, which was discovered in Würzburg, this was the organ of equilibrium, which was discovered as late as 1796 in Naples by Cotugnos. There are 2 inner ear organs, and this is my Maori roadmap. How could I, as a simple boy from the port of Husum, understand what is within 1.5 kilogram of brain? I can look at it, I can cut it, but how to understand? So I created myself in the very beginning, at 1967, a brain. I took a board of 2 square meters, cut it in the middle and said, this is the right brain, left brain. And then I cut it horizontally and I said, this is posterior fossa. Brainstem, cerebellum. White, the new cerebellum, blue, the old, and that is the famous nucleus vestigi. There you see the vestibular nuclei, superior, inferior, lateral, middle. There are the 2 acoustic nuclei. There's the olivary system, everything what's on the right, on the left, lemniscus lateralis, black nucleus, red nucleus, and the pyramidal tract, etc. And all here is the motor track of the oculomotor, accessory, and so on. And then I connected threads through it. This is inferior collicle, superior collicle, thalamus, basal ganglia. There are the canal organs, the otoliths, there's a cochlea, here's the eye, etc. So now when I connect it, it gives me a picture what I want to detect. I want to detect misfunctions, whether they lie in this cabling system or in the nucleus or there in the cerebellum or in the olivary complex, and there the data are flowing into the brain, and there are 6 external eye muscles that they are flowing out, and here's the neck and the hand and the foot. So based on such a chart, which I then reduced as early as 1972, 3 and 4, I was regularly invited by Dr. Graybill from the NASA laboratories in Pensacola in Florida in the United States to work with him, and I wanted to work on my cranioscopography there. And I got a lieutenant and a group of soldiers and a sergeant, and I gave them the instruction what they should investigate, and I was sitting on the beach of the Caribbean and reading and then discussing with Dr. Graybill. And therefore, I made a sketch that we did not talk wrongly. I cut in, or the engineer there cut in aluminum such a shape where I could insert my pencil and just draw this scheme. There is a middle longitudinal vesicle, oculomotor nuclei, vestibular nuclei, accessory loop nuclei. Here's a vestibular nerve, the 3 canals, the nerve, the ganglion, which lead into there. Here's the there's a fourth ventricle, lateral, middle, superior, inferior, vestibular nucleus. There is the cerebellum with the nucleus vestigi organizing it. So this is the control loop from the cerebellum, as very well has been explained by Arne van Bischwasch just now, putting control through GABAergic regulations on the vestibular nuclei. There is a basal ganglion putting control through a dopaminergic loop on the vestibular ganglion. Here is the nystagmus generator complex, paramedian reticular formation. There are the oculomotor nuclei. They form the nystagmus, and Anirban Vishwas has explained it so well biochemically that this acts on acetylcholine. So now when I block this nerve, just cut it, then you see such a picture of a butterfly. That's a peripheral butterfly. However, when the lesion occurs in the cerebellopontine angle, then you see this side is completely normal. But the control loop on the vestibular nuclei of the opposite side doesn't work, so the whole system is disinhibited. So we know now that these two patterns create or are related to lesions created at various sites. And now we can try to build up the system. So that's showing you only on one example this. For instance, when we find these two lesions, which play an important role on the level of the vestibular nuclei, then we regularly are using Zenerzine. And the Zenerzine, as you see here, which was brought up by Janssen in the 60s, which I came to know much about in 1970, is a calcium entry blocker which improves blood circulation and which regulates down on the vestibular nuclei. Anirban has explained it so wonderfully, I don't go further detail. Now, when you take this model, the combined brain with ear, inputting ear and outputting eye, may show you lesions at the inner ear level. So there you have this warm inhibition. At the inner ear nerve level, there you have warm and cold inhibition of that side. At the lower brainstem, the pica, posterior inferior cerebral artery syndrome, which is most common in the aging population, there you see the major butterfly. Then in the mesencephalon, in the midbrain, there you see the directional inhibition, as I showed this afternoon, for instance, after myocardic infarction. And if the lesion occurs on the level of the ultimate projection of the vestibula, where also the tinnitus can be started, or where the tinnitus needs to be started, you have the directional preponderance, which has been explained by Fitzgerald and Hall-Pike from London as early as 1941. Now, we have two types of vestibular preponderance. That is right inhibitory. So the brainstem, mesencephalon, does not produce sufficient right beating nystagmus, and that it disinhibitory. The right temporal lobe is deregulating so that it's overshooting. Now, a second thing is that you are going for the standing, the balance of the human. The human is downregulated through several sensors, as I showed you before, that his muscles and joints keep him upright within this world. And for the West German labor surveillance authorities, I invented in 1968 the craniocorpography, which here is performed by Anirban Vishwas. I look to the top of the human when he is always down regulated not to fall. As Milland was so kind to mention that in Würzburg I regularly give lectures of the interrelation between fine arts and science. And then many artists attend this lecture, and some of them feel tempted of what I tell about equilibrium to cast sculptures of humans. And then they come and say, "Professor, I have made a beautiful sculpture and I stand it and it always falls." I said, "You are completely right. You made a precise picture of the human. Each of us permanently false. But the brain measures it and back regulates us. So with a cane, which you take in your hand for walking, for restabilization, you only need as much as 600 grams for repositioning you. But that helps. So, and then the body needs, or body is back regulated with, as we can see in the light tracing, which is through a mirror system, broad angle system, is reflected into this camera with the amount of lateral sway. And when the fellow steps on the spot, that is the most sensitive situation for the brain. He is built such a way that he must advance. And then we can measure whether he deviates to the side and how much of angle he produces. So how long he walks, how broad he sways in centimeters, how much he deviates in angle, and how much he rotates around his axis. There you see the classical photo-optical craniocorpography as we use it with Frau von Schlachter, and there is the mirror on top, and this is now my latest child in Würzburg. There's the photo-optical, and here's a computer system. We are using what we have in the navigation systems in the car. The patient receives, let me see, next slide should be, no, he receives, is it there? No, then that's all. The patient receives little loudspeakers on his shoulders and loudspeakers on his head, and through a computer shooting short sounds and activating a triangular set of microphones, we triangulate the position so we have a spatial position of the patient, which provides us with 4D data, X, Y, Z, and time. And there we can then construct contrails and anything, which I go to talk in this lectures more and more about. Now we know from our rules, a lesion in the inner ear means a patient with small sway deviates towards the side of the lesion, and a lesion in the brainstem means he enlarges the oscillation. Now this patient is suffering from a Piker syndrome. You provide him with the right treatment, and then you only measure with the ruler the centimeters of sway. And you see, he was at 25 centimeter. He's very instable. The limit of normality is 16.5. And now he is 16. He's completely normal. He tells you there's no more vertigo. There you see the different patterns. We've got a standard chart which telling you the longitudinal deviation, which is telling you the width of the sway, which is most important. A parameter which tells you the deviation to the right or to the left. So this is a completely normal person as he goes into the normal range of deviation, and that's a normal range of rotation. That's a pathological peripheral lesion, and there he is deviating towards the right, and that is a broad sway, that is a central lesion. Easily, just glance, and now our modern computer system projects it immediately. Now we'll talk only a little about the therapy. This is a super training system which we have now in Bad Kissingen. That is an armilar sphere which was invented by the Portuguese shortly before they came to Goa. And Martin Beheim then went from Portugal to Nuremberg and built it, the first globe of the world. And you see here the position of the casts of inner ears. And now you can put the human into any position you want. And the whole thing swings, and you can record it, and so on. Yeah? And here in this armilar sphere, or 3D sphere, you then can build up any physiotherapy. But we would not be doctors if we would not have our... You know, you little sinner, I will correct you. I will put some measures of correction. For me, more or less started with this paper for the big Barani meeting in Amsterdam. And then he came up, he said, Claussen, you're doing so much of electron demography, shall I show you something? And we are working with Dr. Janssen of the therapy, and he came up with the Zenerzine ENG study. It was very interesting. And he said, in the ENG, I can show you that there are effects and non-effect. So the placebo does not show alterations, and the verum shows effects in suppress the excitability, and so it can be well compared. And these are the first ENGs of Dr. Philipson, and there you see the normal behavior, and there you see the suppression of Stuttgart, and there you see still existing nystagmus. Now I must not tell so much anymore on the therapy, as Arneban has done this extensively and well. The basic thing is, a patient comes to your office, you don't know what he's suffering from, he only tells you, oh, so I'm so giddy and so on, yeah. And then you want to cut down the giddiness, you apply dimenhydrinate, 40 milligrams orally. And nowadays, after I knew all the things about Zenerzine, I advised a German company, Hennig, to make a compound of Zenerzine and dimenhydrinate. Alert. That is extremely well accepted. So formerly it was Zenerzine, the number one, but now it's Alert. So if your patient doesn't stop to vomit when he's very badly off, yeah, give him a shot of trifluompromazine, Cyclil, 10 milligrams. You put him in a narcosis, anesthesia. And so then he can recover, and you can think what you would do. Mini-anesthesias, we give beta histine. I must not explain. Arneban did it so well. A promising thing is for the telencephalic vertigo sulpirid. It's a neuroleptic drug. So, you know, when you've got a class of drugs, they have all the different activities, and some go more in this and some go more into the other direction, and that is very effective in telencephalic vertigo. Now, my butterflies, which I explained to you, are inhibited, disinhibited, and so on. But they can be completely normal in old-age people, but still they suffer from vertigo. And then you go to measure the latency. When does this culmination occur? It's much too late. Then you put him on a rotary chair. You perform a pulmonary nystagmus. It occurs much too late. Then you evoke the vestibular brainstem potentials. They appear much too late. So I declared this to be the slow brainstem syndrome of the old. These patients usually suffer from both such an instability on the one side, and on the other side they are suffering from a diffuse tinnitus. Now we have here Vertigo Heal of the company Heal of Baden-Baden. It's a homeopathic drug, and it was my wife in Berlin. She had to see, as Milland mentioned, approximately 300 patients a day. It was like a factory at AET. And then she said, Klaus, my patients respond very well to this homeopathic drug. I said, leave me alone with this bloody homeopathic drug. And then you could put a look on it. It's so effective. So I took this drug, and I found a group of patients who were responding. And these patients are the patients with the slow brainstem syndrome. Now, you go to the components. First of all, it's nearly an allopathic drug, yeah? D4 for picrotoxin, for cocculus, D3 for conium, amber D6, petrol oil D8. Conium has proved that it is extremely effective, as 2,500 years back the Greek sentenced the most prominent philosopher to death. That was Socrates. You've heard about him. And he had to sip by himself the poison hemlock cup. And hemlock is conium. So there is proof that that is effective. Picrotoxin is a cramping poison of the brainstem. Oh, it's also. And petrol oil. In the days when we had, 100 years back, we had many problems with the sterility in our hospitals. Oh, we washed the hospitals completely with carbol, and we saw many people cramping on this. So we apply this to a patient. It must be taken sublingually. It's extremely cheap. Yeah? And the patient says, "Doctor, my vertigo is gone." And you know also something? My tinnitus is away. And we measure him. Okay, the latencies have come into normality. You can, it is as we throw the GABA effect coming from the old cerebellum via the juxtaresciform bundle. We throw it into the washers of the chlorine ion channels. Off it is. And so we don't have the break, we loosen the braking function from the cerebellum. Everything moves quicker. We have published this in the International Journal of Drug Research many years back, together with Dr. Bertera and Bergman de Bertera. Now the patient is lying there in the bed and he says, "Doctor, I'm only in my bed, give me something." Yeah, so you have to go there, and the doctor first sets up a smile. Yeah, he says, "Listen to me, I will help you." And then the doctor has made his butterfly, etc. And here, for instance, we have such a lesion with everything, and with a cardiac insufficiency, nephrolithiasis, and so on. That was handled with ginkgo biloba, recovered. And there was atypical. There's another case where the patient suffers from visual acuity loss and so on, was cured. I will not go much into the detail. Now what I talked this afternoon, the midbrain is protected extremely by blood supply. Blood supply of the brain plays an important role. The human brain, weighing 2% of the human body, however, consumes 25% of the blood being pumped by the heart. If the heart is insufficient to pump, then the midbrain receives too little brain supply and dysfunctions. Here we've got a hypertension case. You see directional inhibition. The left beating doesn't work. And now we take a quaternary ammonium base. All this has been explained by Anirban beautifully. And this is naftitrophoril. And you see this is February 78, and that is December 78, 49 years male, and he's recovered. And this is by myocardic infarction. He suffers from rocking vertigo, falling, blackout, and so on. This is December 77 and December 78. No more vertigo 1 year later. The nystagmus, you see, left beating is not only too small, but also a dissociation. The eyes beat against each other. And 1 year later, everything is repaired as you give a shot to the midbrain. Now, vertigo can be released at any of these positions. As I told you, with a psychiatric therapy, with a triplopromazine, you take consciousness away, you induce a narcosis, then vertigo also has gone. And now you must find out where is the site of the lesion, and as Anirban pointed out, how is the lesion. And again, I come back to this slide, and now you easily understand this man has lost control from the cerebellum upon the vestibular nuclei of the left side there, and then it is completely disinhibited, but the side where the lesion is well controlled from this complex, and therefore there you've got a normal response. Yeah? And if you cut the information input from one sensor organ, you beautifully see it in the butterfly of peripheral inhibition. So for the special vertigo therapy, we try brain needs 25% of all the blood. The blood is worthless if not the important substances penetrate through the endothelium of the arteries into the brain tissue and into the glia. And therefore, you need a transporter. Since 400 past Christ, the Japanese are using this. Then you make the blood more liquid first it was a syrup, and then you put on pentaphyllene, phenoxyphylline, it's more liquid, and it flows quicker. And then you go into the systematics of the brainstem. Okay, this fellow passed a shock bleeding, passed a myocardial infarction, has an insufficient space center in the midbrain. And you give a shot to this. And this you do either with meclofenoxate, that's the most powerful one, and naftofuryl oxalate. So, in the midbrain, we usually have to experience it on substance by substance. Janssen had a very powerful substance, Stuttgart, which all of you are using, and then they experimented and they came up with flunarizine. And flunarizine is a miracle in migraine, but also in tinnitus. And flunarizine influences the midbrain, the pathway, acoustic and vestibular pathways in the midbrain. Midbrain up to the thalamus already, from the midbrain mesencephalon up to the diencephalon. That is, I will talk about this in my lecture on tinnitus. And when we talk so much on the vessels and nutrition, of course, the vessels also have a neurotransmitter regulation with epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, etc. And the younger ladies, or the ladies between, let me say, 15 and 45, they suffer more, as we know now from these huge statistics of NODEC, suffer more from hypotension. Then we add on dihydroergotamine. And the older people suffer more from hypertension. Then we add on dihydroergotoxin, all the single components, dihydroergocryptine or dihydroergocornine, etc. All this has been explained very well by Anirban, and Anirban really gave you all the most important informations which you at home, at a candlelight and a good beer or a good glass of wine, then study and study, and then you have to bring together. Then you have got to investigate your patient, or you send them directly to Anirban, or you send them to Milan, that they and their laboratories investigate them, and then you get the right, or you send them to Jay Gortu, whom I welcome, and so they analyze it and they make you the right prescription. So where do you find the information now? We are publishing out of New York, the International Tinnitus Journal, and together with the State University of New York, I had a virtual show this weekend in New York in the internet, and Professor Schulman phoned my wife this afternoon that this was a big success. From the east, from Kiev, Ukraine, we are publishing the Neurotology newsletter. And the most recent child, together with the Bertera family in Buenos Aires, is the Internet Journal Archives for Sensology and Neurotology in Science and Practice. You type in our homepage, vertigodisness.com, or you go at asnneurotology.org, and you see the number of the homepage, or the level of my homepage is in the flyer which you have received for Australia, and there you find it, you type it in, and then you can read any article, and until now we can finance it, that it is free of charge. We had this homepage at a huge server in the United States, and then the United States government said that they wanted to regulate our homepage and control everything, and I believe a little bit in freedom in the science, and so we placed it to a server in London. As I started, I told you that I'm a neurotologist, and neurotology has 4 lines. That is equilibrium, hearing, and taste and smell. So maybe we then go into the chapters 3 and 4 afterwards. But maybe you also have questions, and I will be proud to answer you. Thank you for your attention.